How are you? My name is Marisella Ouma. I'm currently an intellectual property consultant. My area of specialty is copyright and related rights, traditional knowledge, intellectual property valuation, among other things. Now, I think today one of the things that I want to talk about is making a living out of music. And this is something that I think is very important, and most people need to take music seriously. From the time we're in school, you find that if you tell your parents that you want to make a career out of music, you're frowned upon because everybody wants you to take the traditional careers, mainly, like architecture, law, medicine, and all that stuff. But they don't seem to understand that the creative sector also needs to be looked into, and we need to appreciate music as a career. So you find that even right now, if I'm to name a couple of musicians, you find that someone will tell you, I do this, I'm a musician, but then in my real life, I probably am an accountant. In my real life, I'm an architect. In my real life, I'm doing all these things. So people have to keep on juggling things. But I want people to understand that you can actually make a career out of music, more so if you capitalize on the intellectual property and specifically copyright and related rights. 10 years ago, the government, with the help of WIPO, basically carried out a study on the economic contribution of the music industry. So the creatives as a whole at that time contributed about 5.3, and I think music was probably about 3% of that. So you find that this is an industry that is worth nurturing. And the only way that we can nurture the industry, as earlier spoken, is that you have to understand and appreciate copyright and related rights, because that's the basis of making a living out of music. So one of the things that you look at is we need to stop looking at music as a hobby and look at it as a viable economic activity. And in that way, we need to capitalize on what copyright is all about. So we've dealt with the fundamentals in terms of how much the public has to be aware about copyright and related rights. So we need to start on the fact that people need to know that copyright is a tangible property like any other. And it's basically materialized in music. So you find that you have the songwriters, you have the performers, you have the producers of the sound recording. All these people basically have to earn a living out of the creative sector of the copyright industry. So how do we make music a business? Number one, as I said, we need to appreciate copyright. So we need to have our music protected. So if you're the songwriter, make sure that your composition is protected. If you're the producer of the sound recording, make sure that you have proper agreements between yourself and the publisher or the performer of the music or the composer, so that you have a proper and clear value chain from the production, from the composition of the song, all the way to the time when it's been distributed. Just a brief synopsis of what the music industry is like, and with the attendant copyright issues. You compose a song. As the composer, author, you have a right in the music. So more often than not, you'll find that you'll need to engage either a performer, or you'll be a performer yourself, or you have to go to the studio to write the music. So you have to have very clear contracts between yourself and the performers, if you're not the performer, or the producer of the sound recording. So over and above that, you need to know what rights you're assigning. So you can either assign your entire economic rights or part of the economic rights. More often than not, we advise the authors and composers to try and retain the copyrights and get into some royalty agreements. And I think this has been discussed in the segment that deals with collective management organizations. Then you go to the producers of the sound recordings. And beyond that, you have the distribution mechanism. And as it stands right now, we're not only dealing with the traditional distribution, we're looking at online distribution. You're looking at the telcos, you're looking at the internet-based broadcasting organizations. So all these, at one point in time, end up contributing to that particular industry. So basically, for you to be able to make money out of it, you have to run it as any other business. So you have to have professional management. You have to have people who understand the copyright and copyright-related issues. So for instance, if you're dealing with collective management, you need to know the main issues that regard good governance, principles of governance. As a musician, Again, you have to engage professionals to run your business, and that they should be able to know what rights are going where and how much you're going to get out of those particular rights. So, I mean, there are many issues that we need to look into. If I'm just to think from the top of my head, the musicians who have successfully done that in Kenya, I don't think I can name more than 10 musicians, because as I said, most of them, this is a side hustle for them. And as I said again, it's because they don't seem to understand the underlying concepts of copyright, because if they do, then they'll capitalize on copyright and related rights. So what's the overall impact of music to the economy? When you have a very well-organized music industry, it contributes quite a bit, because one of the things that we need to know is that we are capitalizing on the talent that we have, especially among the youth. The digital environment has created very many opportunities within which you can operate without violating copyright, and as well as taking advantage of the existing copyright and related rights. So we need to tap into that talent. We need to mold people. We need to train people on various matters as they relate to copyright and related rights. The issue of training on copyright, as it stands right now, it's a very, very specialized area of training, and most of the people whom you find dealing with issues of copyright in the music industry would inevitably be lawyers. And I think this is something that when you're teaching music in our curriculum, we need to incorporate various aspects of intellectual property, more so on copyright and related rights, so that the artists can understand what it is that they need to do, and they stop dealing with it just as a side hustle. One of the things that we can look into it is the issue of professionalization of the music industry. So you find that we can look at it at two levels, mainly in terms of collective management. That would cover the collective management organizations, or industry associations, which basically further the interests of the musicians. Or you might have the trade unions, which again help in terms of giving proper bargaining power to the musicians. You find in countries where they have very strong trade unions, I'll give an example of the UK, they're the ones who determine how much the musicians are going to be paid. So there's a minimum amount. One of the biggest problems we've been having in the industry is that we've got many musicians who don't understand their values, more so in terms of the creative aspect of it and the copyright. So whatever it is, since they're trying to make ends meet, they shall take anything. But if they realize what their value is, and with the power of the trade unions, then they should be able to have a strong bargaining power and come up with the minimum standards, as well as the minimum amounts that people have to be paid when they perform, when they write music, or when their music is used in any kind of media. So you find that they are able to commercialize better when they have a strong industry organization. Now, the other area that we'll be looking at again is collective management. As I said, that again, it's the power of having many people to be able to deal with the issues of public performance and broadcasting of their music by third parties. And it is important to have to join the organizations and ensure that the organizations are accountable to the musicians, or the producers of the sound recordings, or the performers, depending on which organization you're looking into. So if the musicians do not participate in these organizations, it's very difficult to have very strong governance structures. An advantage of being a member of the collective management organization, in the recent disbursement of the tunes from the telcos, mainly I think the Skiza tunes, you had artists getting as much as 30 million for a period of, I think it was about 8 months. So it just shows you the potential the music industry has, and especially if it is organized. And you see this, the payment of this was done through the collective management organizations and other organizations that are within the industry. Then you find, again, there's the issue of professional management at the individual level. This I had alluded to earlier. It is important to professionalize the music career. So for instance, it's advisable for the artists or the publishers or the performers and all to have professional managers who understand the creative economy as well as the music industry, and more so copyright and other related rights, as well as intellectual property, to run this for them. And this is important because you find that most of the people in the music industry, they're dictated by the contracts which they sign with third parties. So first of all, I'll start with the contracts between, let's say, the musician and a producer, so to speak. The contract should be very clear in terms of you have the general terms and conditions that you find for a contract. It should be very clear as to who owns the intellectual property rights, how they're transferred. So for instance, if the rights are transferred as an assignment, then that means they're completely transferred, and the person has to understand the terms under which they're transferring. It's like, for instance, if someone buys a motor vehicle from you, they basically get the title, the logbook and everything, and they get the motor vehicle, and they can do whatever it is that they want to do with it. So you cannot subsequently come back to them and tell them that you want it back or whatever it is. You'll have to buy it back from them. So these are some of the things they need to understand. So if it's an assignment, they know that they have sold it. They have absolutely no right in it. If it is a license, within that particular agreement, the license has to be very specific in terms of how long the license is going to last, how much they're getting in terms of the license, and the royalties that the person who's the owner of the copyright is going to get based on the licensing of that work. That normally works a lot when you're dealing with broadcasting organizations, when you're dealing with content providers, and that it's advisable to license, and you give them a certain period of time. The advantage of that is once the period of license is over, you're able to, the rights revert back to you. And again, the interesting thing is that you can license part or most of the rights that you have. So for instance, you can license the right of distribution to your music, but you retain the right to, communicate to the public. Or for instance, you have the right of reproduction, but then beyond that, you find that you retain the rights to that particular work. So the goodness with the license is that it gives you flexibility. There are other things that you need to know apart from who owns the rights, how the rights can be transferred, issues of succession, in case something happens to the artist, who ends up with that particular, but more often than not, you find that the laws of succession would kick in at that particular point in time. Again, I said the terms in the case of licenses is very important. Other intellectual property rights, because when you're dealing with musicians, it's not just copyright and related rights that you're dealing with. You have the issues such as trademarks, which basically are very useful when you're talking about branding, when you're branding the artist. It's very interesting because this also helps in valuation of that particular brand. I once had a conversation with one of the prominent artists in Kenya, and when I asked her how much she's worth, she wasn't able to look at it in terms of copyright or intellectual property. So I was telling her, you need to value your creative aspect, and that's how you get to know so and so is worth 10 million, dollars or whatever it is. So it's important for them to understand the valuation, and these are some of the things that will help them negotiate the contracts and agreements that they come with to third parties. Another issue that you'd probably look into, as I said, is the trade associations. These are normally very crucial in terms of bringing the artists together. They're able to discuss issues which are common to them. They're able to engage the various government agencies, because it's very difficult for you to go as an individual artist and say either you're going to the Copyright Board or the Ministry of Culture, or you're going to one of the various government institutions, the Permanent Presidential Music Commission and all. When you go in a group of people, again, they always say it's easier when you're many as opposed to you pushing your individual agenda. So I think it would be important for them the musicians, to make sure that they join the organizations, or in the alternative, strengthen the existing organizations. I think finally, one of the things that I'm going to look at is just the overall utilization of copyright in the music industry. Number one, it gives your music, the creative part, a value, because copyright deals with the creative aspect. So once you understand that it is creativity that you're dealing with, you need to know how much that creativity costs. More often than not, they'll tell you maybe it's after it's been distributed or anything, but from the word go, the way you'd sit down and price, like for instance, if I was to manufacture this pen, if someone asked me the cost value of this particular pen, I can give it. I'll sit down and calculate the material that I've put into, the hours that I've put it into, and to finally come up with this product. So people need to understand that music is also a product of your intellectual capacity. So you should be able to quantify it and say, I spent, 3 months working on this particular track. I used these resources for me to be able to do this. So you'll be able to quantify the cost. And then over and above that, now the value increases based on the listenership. Then the other thing is increasing training and understanding of copyright and related rights. Again, this one I think I'll keep on harping about it because most people don't seem to understand what copyright is all about. So if you know what copyright is, you understand how to use it, how you're going to sell it, how you're going to license it, how you're going to, it determines your interactions with third parties such as broadcasters, content providers, other users, the users who use the music publicly, and even people who use it individually, because like right now, most of us stream or download music from the internet. And I think it is important that you understand that it's not for free. The internet looks free, but the content on the internet is not necessarily free unless it's been put there under Creative Commons. Then there's the issue of making it available. One of the biggest problems we have when it comes to the unauthorized use of music by third parties is that the music is not available. So you launch an album today, and when I go to the stores or I go online, I cannot get the album. But somebody attended the launch, or they managed to get a copy of the demo tape, or the demos, the demo, the master of the music. They make copies and they sell. So you find that we end up aiding and abetting unauthorized use of music, which is otherwise known as piracy, because of lack of availability, not taking advantage of the distribution channels. We need to look at the current market trends and see what kind of people, media people access the music from. So you'll find that the younger people are normally streaming it. So what kind of business models can you adopt so that you safeguard your copyright, but at the same time, you allow people to access the music? And finally, I think it's the issue of enforcement. This is probably a three-pronged approach. There's the part whereby we have to look at enforcement from the part of awareness creation. People need to understand what copyright is all about so that they can respect it. Number two, there's the issue of training the artists so that they are able to assert their rights. And then number three now comes to enforcing the law itself. Now that's basically the use of either the civil procedure or the criminal sanctions, and that one normally comes in as a last resort. So most people, when they're made aware of copyright, they are more willing to ensure that they do not infringe on copyright and related rights. So copyright is a business. Copyright should be music should be looked at as a business and not just as a hobby. And there's the need to capitalize on existing copyright and related rights in Kenya. Copyright, what exactly is copyright? Copyright is basically a branch of intellectual property, and it basically deals with the creative aspect of the intellect. So for instance, it grants the owner the right to be able to authorize or prohibit other people from using his creative works. I'll give you a very simple example. If I'm a musician and I write a song, copyright basically controls how I relate with other people in terms of the use of that particular song. So for instance, I should be able to authorize somebody else to use it, to allow them, give them permission to use it, or I can decide I will not allow you to use this particular music. So it helps in terms of commercialization of your creative work. So in a nutshell, that's basically what copyright is all about. Copyright, like any other intellectual property rights, is firmly rooted in the Constitution. So you find that it is protected like any other property. So although it's intangible in nature, like you cannot exactly feel it apart from the products, it is protected like any other movable property. So you can buy buy it, you can sell it, you can transfer it, you can deal with it the way you deal with any other property. You can even use it as security. So it's one of those things that we need to know, that it is property like any other property.